The German machine gunners laughed as they watched. Black American soldiers stumbled backward through smoke, through mud, through the frost-hardened earth of France. It was November 1944. Sergeant Thomas Cole could hear their mocking shouts cutting through the artillery fire. Sharp, clear, like razor blades slicing through his concentration. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. Mud coated every inch of his uniform. Thick, cold, unforgiving. He gripped his M1 Garand tighter, knuckles white beneath the grime. The 92nd Infantry Division was retreating again, or so it appeared to the Wehrmacht troops entrenched ahead. The Buffalo soldiers were falling back, boots churning frozen earth into slurry. Ice mixed with blood. 3 men were already down. Private Jackson clutched his shoulder where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone, his face contorted in silent agony. The pain was obvious. The scream was trapped in his throat. The Germans had superior position, superior firepower, and apparently superior confidence. Their laughter echoed across no man's land, a sound that made Cole's jaw clench until his teeth ached, until he tasted blood. They thought this was over. They thought the Buffalo soldiers were broken. They had no idea what was coming. What the Germans didn't know would cost them everything. The plan had been born 3 nights earlier. A farmhouse cellar that stank of rot and cordite. Captain William Harris had spread a stolen German map across a splintered table. His finger traced the enemy defensive line. The bunkers formed an impenetrable wall, each one supporting the others in overlapping fields of fire. A frontal assault would be suicide. Going around would take weeks they didn't have. But Harris had noticed something the Germans hadn't considered. A dried creek bed that snaked behind their eastern flank. Invisible from their vantage point, deep enough to hide crawling men, deep enough to hide 20 soldiers moving like snakes through mud. Cole had volunteered immediately when Harris explained the plan. It was insane. It was desperate. It required the enemy to believe they were winning right up until the moment they lost everything. The Germans had to see retreat. They had to taste victory. They had to drop their guard just long enough. Just long enough for 20 Buffalo soldiers to emerge from that creek bed. With grenades, with fury, with something to prove. Now, as Cole fell back with exaggerated panic in his movements, he counted seconds. Somewhere to the east, Corporal Davis was leading the flanking team, inching forward while the main force drew every German eye, every German gun. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. These untold stories of extraordinary courage deserve to be remembered, and your support helps us keep bringing them to light. The enemy machine guns rattled without pause, kicking up geysers of frozen dirt around Cole's boots. Bullets whined past his helmet so close he could feel their heat. This wasn't just for show. If they didn't make the retreat look authentic, the flanking team would be slaughtered. Davis and his men would die before they could strike. Private Henderson went down beside him with a scream Cole would hear in his nightmares for decades. The bullet caught him in the thigh, spinning him like a child's top before he collapsed. Cole grabbed him by the collar without breaking stride, dragging him backward, maintaining his rifle with one hand. His shoulder screamed in protest, muscles tearing with the effort. But Henderson was 22 years old. He had a pregnant wife back in Alabama. And Cole would die before he left him behind. The German laughter grew louder. They were shouting now, words Cole couldn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. They thought they'd broken the Buffalo soldiers, thought they'd proven what their propaganda claimed, that black troops were inferior, cowardly, unfit for combat. Let them think it. Let them celebrate. Every second of their mockery bought Davis another yard of progress, another moment closer to the bunkers. Cole's platoon reached the tree line, their designated fallback position, a cluster of shattered oaks that offered minimal cover, but marked the point where they'd make their stand. He dropped Henderson behind a fallen trunk, checked the wound. Bad, but survivable if they could get him to a medic within the hour. The private's eyes were wide with shock and pain, but he managed a weak nod when Cole squeezed his shoulder. Lieutenant Morrison materialized through the smoke, his face streaked with soot and blood from a gash above his eye. "How long?" he asked. The question was barely audible over the continuing German fire. Cole checked his watch. The crystal was cracked from earlier impact, but still ticking, still counting down. 5 minutes, maybe less. Morrison's jaw tightened. He nodded once before moving down the line, whispering to each man, preparing them for what came next. The Germans were advancing now, leaving their bunkers in small groups. Confident the Americans were finished. Cole could see them moving through the smoke like ghosts, rifles ready, but their posture was casual, almost leisurely. They thought this was cleanup. Some were still laughing, sharing cigarettes as they walked, treating this like a training exercise rather than combat. Their officers shouted commands, organizing them into a skirmish line, a line that would sweep forward and finish off any resistance. Cole's hands stopped trembling. His breathing steadied. He'd been afraid earlier. Anyone who said they weren't afraid in combat was either lying or insane. But now something else took over. Cold calculation. Absolute focus. He positioned himself behind a tree. Clear sight line to the German advance. Settled into a shooter's stance. The familiar weight of his rifle was a comfort in his hands. Around him, the surviving members of his platoon did the same. Their faces set in expressions that mixed exhaustion with grim determination. They'd trained for this moment, prepared for this fight. Not because they wanted war, but because war had found them anyway. The 92nd Infantry Division had been formed in 1917 during the First World War. Black soldiers serving in segregated units, fighting for a country that denied them basic rights back home. They'd been given the worst equipment, the least training time, the most dangerous assignments, and they'd still fought with distinction. Now, decades later, their descendants wore the same patch, the same buffalo insignia, fighting the same battles for recognition. Cole had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama. He'd seen the signs. Whites only. Colored entrance in back. He'd felt the weight of eyes that saw skin color before humanity. He'd joined the army thinking maybe service would change things, that proving himself in combat would matter. But even here, thousands of miles from home, he fought on two fronts. Against the Germans ahead, and against the doubt behind. White officers who questioned every order, who assumed incompetence, who waited for failure. Davis had told him once, late at night in a frozen foxhole, "We can't just be good, we have to be perfect, and even then it might not be enough." Cole had known he was right. So they'd become perfect, or as close to perfect as exhausted, hungry, scared men could be. They'd studied tactics other units ignored, memorized terrain, planned contingencies for contingencies. Because failure wasn't just military defeat. It was ammunition for every racist who claimed they didn't belong. The Germans were 70 yards away when the first explosion shattered the morning air. It came from behind their lines. A thunderous boom that sent a fireball climbing into the gray sky. Then another. Then sustained burst of small arms fire. Davis had reached the bunkers. The German advance faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. They tried to understand what was happening behind them, but understanding came too late. Cole's voice cut through the chaos. Clear, commanding, absolute. "Now!" The buffalo soldiers who'd been retreating moments before exploded from the tree line, not running away, running toward, not with panic, with controlled aggression. Cole's rifle barked, once, twice, 3 times, each shot finding its mark. German soldiers dropping before they could turn fully around. Around him, his men fired with precision. They'd trained for this. Every range session, every drill, every moment of preparation distilled into this instant. The Germans were caught, trapped between two forces. Davis behind, Cole ahead. The laughter had stopped. Now there was only screaming. Cole ran forward in a crouch, using terrain, using smoke, using every advantage. A German soldier appeared through the haze, young, maybe 19, eyes wide with shock. He raised his rifle. Cole was faster. A 3-round burst to center mass. The German dropped. No time for reflection, no time for mercy. This was survival. This was mission. This was proving everyone wrong. 30 yards, 20, 10. A concrete bunker loomed ahead. Machine gun still firing, still sweeping across the field. Cole pulled a grenade from his belt, counted, threw. The explosion was muffled. Then silence from the bunker. Morrison was beside him now, then Private Webb, then others. The platoon moving as a unit, covering each other, supporting each other. Behind the bunkers, Davis and his team were pushing forward. Cole could see them now, mud-covered, exhausted, but moving with purpose. The trap had worked. A German officer emerged from a command bunker, hands raised, face pale. "Wir ergeben uns," he said. "We surrender." More Germans followed, throwing down weapons, hands on heads, the fight draining from their eyes. Cole kept his rifle trained on them, breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Morrison was shouting orders, securing prisoners, establishing a perimeter. But Cole heard it distantly. His mind was replaying the battle. Every decision, every moment where things could have gone wrong. Henderson's scream. The bullet that missed his head by inches. Davis almost trapped when a bunker hadn't been where the map showed. They'd won. But the cost. Cole turned and looked back toward the tree line. Medics were working on the wounded. Some would make it. Others. Private Williams wouldn't make it. Cole could see that from here. Could see the medic's defeated posture. The sheet being pulled up. Williams was 20 years old. From Detroit. Wanted to be a teacher. Now he'd never teach anyone anything. The German officer who'd surrendered approached slowly, carefully, his hands still visible. "You speak English?" Cole asked. "Some, yes." The officer's accent was thick but understandable. "What's your name?" "Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, Captain." Cole nodded. He pulled a canteen from his belt, took a drink, offered it to Weber. The German captain hesitated, then accepted, drank carefully. "You fought well," Weber said quietly. "The retreat, it was deception. It was tactical." Weber looked at the Buffalo soldiers securing the position. His expression was complex. Surprise, respect. Something else Cole couldn't quite read. "We were told that you—" Weber trailed off. "Told we weren't real soldiers?" Cole finished. "Told we'd break? Told we were inferior?" Weber's silence was answer enough. Cole gestured to the captured bunkers, the prisoners, the battlefield where German confidence had died. "You believed what you were told. That was your first mistake. Underestimating us was your last." The aftermath brought something Cole hadn't expected. Not celebration, not quite relief, just exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. They held the position for 3 days. Reinforcements arrived, then orders to push forward. The German line was breaking, the war was turning, but Cole barely noticed. He wrote letters to families. Williams, Carson, who died in the initial retreat. Peterson, who'd bled out before the medics could reach him. What do you tell a mother? That her son died heroically? That his sacrifice mattered? All of it was true. None of it helped. 2 weeks later, newspaper correspondents arrived. They wanted stories, wanted heroes, wanted dramatic quotes about courage and victory. Cole found himself uncomfortable with the attention. They didn't want to hear about Henderson's nightmares, about Webb's hands that wouldn't stop shaking, about Mitchell's 1,000-yard stare. The real cost couldn't be captured in headlines. The Silver Star ceremony was held in a muddy field. Division brass attended, photographers carefully positioned to capture images for newspapers back home. Cole stood at attention while a general pinned the medal to his chest, listening to citations that felt disconnected from his memory. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy, Sergeant Thomas Cole displayed exceptional tactical acumen and personal courage in leading his men against fortified enemy positions. The words were accurate, but incomplete. They didn't mention Williams dying, or Carson torn apart, or the terror of charging toward machine guns. They reduced complex human experience to military jargon, transforming trauma into achievement, loss into acceptable cost. After the ceremony, a letter arrived from his mother, forwarded through military mail channels. She wrote about his hometown newspaper running a story, about local hero Thomas Cole, about neighbors who'd previously avoided their family now stopping to offer congratulations, about his younger brother suddenly being treated better at school. The letter should have brought joy. Instead, Cole felt anger rising in his chest. He'd needed to nearly die, to watch friends die, to outsmart an enemy in battle, just for people back home to recognize his humanity. The Buffalo Soldiers had proven themselves, not once, but twice. And apparently that was barely enough. Barely enough to shift opinions that should never have needed battlefield victories to validate. The injustice made Cole want to throw his medal in the mud. But he knew that would dishonor the men who'd followed him, who'd bled for the recognition these awards represented. Davis found him behind the mess tent, staring at his mother's letter. "You okay?" Cole shook his head. "I keep thinking about what we had to do to earn this respect, how many battles, how many men lost, and I'm wondering if any amount of blood will ever be enough." They sat in silence. Two soldiers who'd survived hell together. Eventually, Davis spoke. "Maybe it won't be enough. Maybe we'll spend our whole lives proving ourselves to people who will never really see us." He paused, choosing his words carefully. But what we did here wasn't just for them. It was for us, for each other, for every black soldier who comes after us. We showed that when given a chance to lead, to strategize, to fight on our own terms. We're as capable as anyone. Cole nodded slowly. The anger didn't disappear, but it settled, crystallized into something else. Determination, purpose. If the cost of changing minds was this high, then every victory mattered. Every battle won, every enemy defeated, not for validation, but for the next generation. So maybe they wouldn't have to prove so much. 6 weeks later, the war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Buffalo Soldiers received orders to occupy territory in northern Italy, transitioning from combat operations to peacekeeping with disorienting speed. Cole never saw combat again. He spent remaining months processing German prisoners, helping displaced civilians, filling out paperwork that reduced years of service to bureaucratic records. The battles that had made him temporarily famous faded from public consciousness. The nation turned its attention to rebuilding, to returning to normal. The Buffalo Soldiers who survived returned home to an America that had barely changed. They'd fought for freedom abroad while their families faced segregation at home. They'd proven themselves capable leaders in Europe, while being denied leadership opportunities in civilian life. The recognition earned on battlefields evaporated. Skin color still determined opportunity more than capability or character. But something had changed within the men themselves. They'd stared down death, outsmarted enemies who'd underestimated them, proven to themselves what they were capable of achieving. That knowledge couldn't be taken away, not by discrimination, not by prejudice. They carried it quietly, passing it to children and grandchildren. The understanding that despite what society claimed, they were limited only by their own determination. Cole eventually became a teacher, spending 40 years educating children about history, about mathematics, about critical thinking. He rarely spoke about his war experiences. Words couldn't adequately convey the complexity. But sometimes students asked about the medals displayed in his classroom. the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and he'd tell them about the time Buffalo soldiers turned retreat into victory, about using your mind as much as your courage, about how sometimes the most effective weapon is the enemy's own assumptions. The battles near those concrete bunkers became case studies at military academies, stripped of human cost, analyzed purely for tactical innovation. Officers studied Cole's decisions, debating alternative approaches, discussing how principles applied to modern warfare. Few analyses mentioned that the tactics had emerged from soldiers given no choice but to innovate, who'd faced enemies on multiple fronts, including prejudice from their own command structure. Davis became a boxing trainer, channeling wartime experiences into teaching young fighters discipline, strategy, the importance of protecting yourself while inflicting maximum damage. Mitchell returned to Louisiana, married his childhood sweetheart, spent 50 years working construction. He carefully never discussed the war. Henderson's wound healed imperfectly, leaving him with a permanent limp and a Purple Heart kept in a drawer rather than displayed. The German officer, Captain Weber, survived the war, returned home to find his house destroyed, but his family alive. He never knew that the Black American sergeant had advocated for better treatment of German prisoners, had argued against casual cruelty, had recognized shared humanity even across enemy lines. Years later, historians debated whether battles had unfolded exactly as records suggested, whether tactical details had been embellished, whether individual acts of courage had been properly attributed. But the essential truth remained undeniable. The Buffalo soldiers had faced overwhelming odds, had been mocked by enemies who underestimated them, and had turned that contempt into tactical advantage, through brilliance, through courage, through unshakable determination to prove their worth, on battlefields that should never have been necessary proving grounds in the first place. When you face doubt, remember this. When they say you can't, when the system bets on your failure, sometimes the most powerful weapon is letting them underestimate you. Cole and the Buffalo soldiers didn't just win a battle. They transformed prejudice into advantage. They proved that intelligence under pressure matters more than any presumed superiority. They showed that innovation is born from necessity, that respect is earned through excellence, that sometimes the best move is making the enemy believe they've already won, until they realize the door has already slammed shut behind them. This story isn't just about war. It's about transforming limitations into strategy, about men who used arrogance as fuel, about a legacy that still teaches that underestimating someone can be the last mistake you make. If this story moved you, drop a like and subscribe for more untold stories from history. And please share in the comments which moment struck you most. Was it the moment the trap was sprung, Henderson being dragged through mud, or Cole confronting Captain Weber? Your engagement helps ensure these heroes' stories reach the audiences they deserve. The Buffalo soldiers proved everything they needed to prove. Now it's our turn to make sure their story is never forgotten.